next is the models of memory. The first one that I'm going to talk about is the multi-store model of memory. This is a very traditional model. It has been there a long time, and it's basically, they say, is the most influential one. Okay. However, it has been criticized because it's too simple. It's too simple, people criticize. It's too complicated, people criticize. But what matters is whether it is still applicable or not to this day. Okay. So according to Atkinson and Schriffin, this model is like more than 50 years old, basically. Okay. Or is it? Yeah, 50, but 50 years old, yeah. And sensory information, there are three types of information. The main types are sensory information, whereby they are echoic, okay, whatever that you hear, iconic, whatever that you see, and haptic, basically anything that you feel, like touching and yeah, things like that. Okay, you can feel them, or maybe you try to feel the texture of it, like that. Okay, and then after sensory information, it of course becomes sensory memory, whatever that you remember from the touch sensation, from the whatever that you hear, the voice, or maybe information people tell you, like I'm giving you information right now. Okay, and iconic, anything that you see, right? You see them and you remember them, capture them like a camera, for example. And then if you pay attention to this sensory memory, what happens next is you will turn them into short-term memory, which is also very brief, but not as brief as sensory memory. And then if you rehearse them and try to retrieve them, okay, they become your long-term memory, basically, if you keep on rehearsing them, rehearsing the information again and again. Okay, by how do you rehearse them? You either basically repeat that by chanting them, again and again, or maybe you keep on reading the same information and again, or maybe you keep on touching to remember how it feels or the texture of something before you go and buy your new uniform, for example. You remember this cloth material that you like, and then you want to go to the shop and feel the same material again so that you can buy the same one, for instance. Okay, and then you keep rehearsing them, and then when it gets to you, becomes your long-term memory, you just have to get there and then retrieve it again. Okay, this is how it feels and things like that. Okay, that's how this is what Atkinson and Schriffin talk about in their model. Okay, so sensory memory, according to this model, it decays very quickly, holds information for less than 1 second. That is why it's very, very, very super brief. Okay, automatic response, it's out of cognitive control, basically. We don't control them in our brain, basically. Don't control how long it stays and all that, unless, so yeah, I'm going to talk about that after then we talk about short-term memory. So their types is, as I said, iconic, whatever that you see. So it's fast decaying storage of visual information, briefly stores an image which has been perceived for a short duration of time. You see it in a glance, and then you have to remember them, for instance. Okay, like a friend showing you the picture of his new girlfriend or boyfriend, for instance, and give you just like sekali lalu, where basically just show you in front of your face and then pull it again. Then you cannot actually register, for instance, unless you have photographic memory. Then you remember exactly who that is, right? Things like that. Echoic is whatever that you hear. Fast decaying as well. Auditory information. And briefly store sounds that have been perceived for short duration. And haptic is represent database of touch stimuli. And the next model is the working memory model. It's Baddeley and Hitch that was introduced in 1974, 6 years after Atkinson and Schrifin's model. So this model is slightly different, but not to say that it's totally different, totally not the same, because they have some similar element, basically talking about memory. Okay, so the middle one in the oval that is green, I cannot say this is circle, or my son will scold me because he will say this is an oval because it's not really a circle, right? Okay, so the green oval in the middle is episodic buffer. So what is it? What is an episodic buffer? So basically, whatever memory that we have, we need to go through an episodic buffer. Basically, this is what it means in order to get to long-term memory. So there's this as central executive, the pink one in the middle, right? It's act as an action sensory store that drives or coordinate the whole system. So central executive is more important here, is in the middle. So it's whatever that is the center of attention. Okay. So it goes through a phonological loop, the one on the blue box on the left, stores auditory information by silently rehearsing sounds, okay, or words in a continuous loop. So phonological loop is anything that you hear because it rhymes with the phonological. Phonology is anything that you can hear, okay? So it's the sound of it. So you store this information by you rehearse them again and again and again in a continuous loop. Celery rehearsing sounds of words. For example, when you learn a new word, you don't know how to pronounce phonology previously, for instance. And then some of the terms that you use, like for instance, otorhinolaryngology, you know that it's the longest term basically in medical posting, right? And then you have to get it right in your first year, for instance. But now it just came so naturally to you because you have been rehearsing them, you've been listening to how people say that for the past 4 years, for instance. Okay, repetition of telephone number over and over again. This is something that goes back a long way before we have handphones, right? Back in school, when your friend give you a number and then you don't want to open your bag and get your pencil and paper or pen or paper to write down the number, so you just have to memorize them and then get into the car, get home, and write them down again when you, or maybe you get into the car, you want to write them down straight away and things like that. So this is like you have to repeat them in your minds again and again and again. Maybe 774 5335, and you want to keep on remembering that, so you repeat them again and again. Okay. And then after that, another type is visual spatial sketchpad. Visual, okay, a visual is basically when you see them, okay, look at them, and then and spatial information as well, like counting the windows of a house and trying to remember where to get to any place at all. Like how do you navigate yourself around the campus, for instance? Like some people, they have very good memory about space because that's why they call them like they have spatial better spatial recognition than the other people. Some people, they just go to that place 10 times and they still couldn't find it. Okay. Some people like me, for instance, I go to clinic so many times, I still have to navigate myself around which if I come up from different doors, I will have to basically be lost for a while before I'm able to find them again. Like basically I have to look around, things like that. Okay. So that is the Bedley and Hitch model. Okay. Phonological loop and visual spatial sketchpad, and then central executive act as an attention sensory mode, and then it goes to long-term memory. That's how you're able to remember it. Okay, from the episodic buffer. Okay, so this is the long explanation of what it means. So you can, okay, I've already summarized it to you, so you can read through it after this. Okay, and then the working memory basically applies to real life tasks like reading, that is a phonological loop, as I said. Problem solving, that is a central executive. Okay, why is the central executive important? As I said just now, because you need it to solve problem. Okay, because you need to basically sit down and think actively in order to get to the to how to solve a problem. Okay, and navigation as well, to move around, to drive around, to get to some place, you need navigation. Evidence suggests that working memory use two different systems for dealing with visual and verbal information. So, for instance, it is easier to perform two tasks involving different domains than the same domain. For instance, some of you can be reading while listening to music because the task of listening to music is just basically it's just by auditory, and then you are looking, so you need to looking on the screen to read your slides, so it's visual. So you are using two different types of domains to basically do the different two different tasks at the same time. So you can say that you're multitasking, for instance. Okay, and then you can also drive while eating because you're using different parts of the brain to basically do that. But then you cannot actually drive while reading the text. That's why we don't allow you to do that, because you're both are using eyes and then you need to pay attention to what you're reading as well and then on the road. Okay. So types of memory, as we know, the first type I'm going to talk about is the short-term memory. Perhaps you already know this information. So let's just refresh it for you guys. Okay. Short-term memory, we know that the capacity of holding, not manipulating a small amount of information that is readily available. So only a small amount of memory can be stored in short-term memory. It is known as a primary or active memory because you constantly have to use your short-term memory. Like right now, when you're listening to lecture and all that, you have to be engaged in the situation. So you need to use your short-term memory. Information kept in short-term memory by process of rehearsal. Again, you have to rehearse them from the sensory memory in order to for it to become short-term memory, although it happens within a few seconds. Okay, enable us to hold conversation and pay attention to immediate surrounding. Like when you are talking to me, for instance, when I'm asking you questions, so you have to be engaged, so you have to need to have your short-term memory intact, for instance. Okay. But there are some patients with short-term memory loss, they cannot hold information because when you ask them something, you have to ask them again and it goes back and forth to the same type of problem again and again. You have to keep asking them because you can't remember. Okay? And short-term memory refers to, this one is basically based and the definition given by a researcher, and it was published as well. So short-term memory refers to systems which provide retention of limited amount of material for a limited period of seconds. Okay, so it includes storage and rehearsal components, with the latter providing maintenance of events in memory against short-term forgetting. So yeah, discrete brain regions to support short-term memory, with left hemisphere posterior parietal and premotor frontal networks being more involved in phonological short-term memory, and right hemisphere region of spatial STM. Okay, so it contributes to learning of new information and aspect of speech comprehension and production. So that's why it matters what we have learned before. It helps with our short-term memory as well. So everything in your long-term memory can help your short-term memory as well. Okay. So short-term memory, the capacity is limited. So it follows the Miller's rule of magical number of 7 plus minus 2. Okay. So seven piece of information, or it could be 5 or 9. Okay. So basically, it can be anything. It can be you can remember 7 chunks of information at the same time, and then the chunk it differs between people. Some people are able to remember just 7 pieces of perhaps phone numbers, 7 phone numbers, different phone numbers. And some people are only able to remember 7 numbers at a time, for instance, and it differs between how we store them as well. And then duration limited, brief 15 to 30 seconds, that's short-term memory. And then encoding, they are primarily acoustic. Okay, and chunking basically help us to improve our short-term memory, as I said just now, because we want them to be more than just a 7 small piece of information. If it can be bigger, why not, right? So each chunk, it depends on how we do the chunking. We organize them and group various pieces of information together. Let's say you want to remember about our basically lecture. Okay, one lecture in psychiatry. You want to remember personality traits. But how do you want to organize them into remembering the different type of personality traits, for example? You want to remember the 5 types of personality, for example. There are openness, conscientiousness, and then the extraversion. We're going to talk, your friend will be presenting this in personality traits and disorder. And then what else? You have assertiveness and then neuroticism. You want to remember 5 of these, not just remembering 5 of these, but you want to chunk that into remembering each type of personality traits and what do they actually mean. And then you have to remember the opposite of it as well. What about people who are extrovert? And then what are the opposite of it? There are people who are introvert, for example. Okay, and then those are the things that you want to remember. You want to put that into 5 little chunks. Okay, 5 big chunks or little chunks. It depends on how you want to remember, how much you want to remember. So you organize them in a way that is meaningful to you and works for you. Okay. So memorize the chunk instead of individual information. And then you retrieve them easier, basically, if you do that. You retrieve easy retrieval of the information if you do chunking, and then chunk act as cues as well. Like you remember the word of it, like you put that into mnemonics of ocean, conscious, conscientious, and all that. So that's the reason why I'm able to remember, for instance, for so many years, I'm able to remember what it means and then how it goes. Okay, so for easy recollection as well. Okay, so it means when you do chunking, you put individual pieces of information that are bound together into a meaningful whole. So example of chunking is this. Some people, as I said, they are able to remember 1 phone number at a time. Why is that? Because they are doing this. They are putting this number into 4 different chunks so that they can remember just one of these numbers. Okay, if they want to remember more than one, they might have difficulties, for instance. Okay, they should basically just remember it in a way like this is just one chunk, basically this whole number, for instance, if you are able to. Okay, but technology help us to do not having to remember numbers because we have everything stored in our phone, so that's lucky to us, right? And for short-term memory to long-term memory, basically, we can remember things, we can put them into our long-term memory because we experience them, rehearse them, practice them, associate them with what we already know, okay, and apply them. Long-term memory, on the other hand, information held for longer times, perhaps is permanent. Researchers believe that they are there forever, basically. Just that when we don't trigger them to come out, we don't remember them. Secondary memory is called because primary memory or active memory is short-term memory, right? So this is secondary. Okay. The irony of its name secondary, although it's more important as well, it's also very important. Enable us to remember things we have experienced in the past and all things that we have learned. And then capacity is potentially unlimited. duration, any time you store that, for a long period of time, and perhaps up to a lifetime. Okay, and then the encoding method is semantic. Organizations in long-term memory, there are long-term memory, there's explicit or declarative memory, or you can call them conscious memory as well. And then in terms of implicit, they are unconscious um, or procedural memory. You do it, you don't even notice what you are doing, you just do it subconsciously, basically. Or even you can say that you're unconscious, but you cannot say that you're totally unconscious in a way. But although the name is unconscious, right? But you will listen to what I say after this, and then you will get what I mean by this, okay? And then under explicit memory or conscious memory, there are episodic memory and semantic memory. I will show you some examples, okay? So under explicit or declarative memory, or what we call conscious memory just now, it means memory of facts and events that can be consciously recalled. For instance, under episodic memory, when I say it's all about me just now, right? Responsible for storing information about events or episodes that you have experienced in your life, okay? And then involves conscious thought or explicit and is declarative. For instance, it's something that's meaningful to you. You remember your birthday, you remember your parents' birthday or your loved one's birthday, or maybe some dates that is important to you, right? And then like the first day you step into medical school, the first day you pass, and then when you pass your OSCE exam, for instance, and then later on when you pass your Pro 2 exam, you remember the dates, for instance. Okay? And you remember your white coat ceremony when the date and all that. And then in terms of semantic memory, on the other hand, it's just basically based on facts, responsible for storing information about the world, the meaning of words, as well as general knowledge. Okay, all the words that you remember, basically like what it means by when people say psychology, what it means to you. Okay, and then when people say abnormal, does it mean to you, and then what does every single thing means, like psychopathy, when people say psychopathy, and then you actually have that in your mind really, because it's basically, and that is called you remembering the facts. What does every single fact means to you? Okay, and all the medical terms as well, what do they mean, medical jargons that we people who are not in medical school wouldn't know, and you know it more than us, okay? Because you learn it and it become your semantic memory. And something declarative as well. For example, Kuala Lumpur is the capital city of Malaysia, for instance. Okay, so people who are not from Malaysia, they might not know it, or people who are further from Malaysia, they will ask you whether Kuala Lumpur is Kuala Lumpur in Singapore. They might ask questions like that because I've experienced that before. And when you say you're from Malaysia, people will be asking you similar questions. Where is Malaysia on the map, for instance? But we know that, because we've been learning that since we were young. And on the other hand, what we call as unconscious memory or implicit or procedural memory is enables us to perform many everyday physical activities. For instance, as I said just now, can you be riding your bike unconsciously? Of course, you can't do that. Okay, but you have learned that, and you have basically don't have to be how to say, you don't have to be consciously thinking about doing it, like basically how to ride a bike, unless it's your first time doing it. So you have to be doing it, okay? You have to be conscious to basically navigate yourself around, and then handling the handle of the bicycle and making sure you don't fall, for instance. Okay, so this is a skills memory responsible for you knowing how to do things, like how to operate a can opener, how to use the BP maybe blood pressure check, right? And then how to basically use a stethoscope, for instance, okay, and how to test a patients for reflex, things like that. It does not involve a conscious thought or implicit. You already know how to do it, for instance. Those are procedural memory. They are not declarative. For example, things like including cycling, swimming, and also driving. Okay, if you notice that it remain intact as well in most amnestic patients. Although people who are amnestic, they cannot remember who their loved ones are, for instance, but they can still remember how to drive a car, how to ride a bike, how to swim. So that is something amazing, basically, because it all is always going to be there, okay, in a way. And then this is the difference between short-term and long-term memory. You can have a read towards it, okay, because I have a summary over here, okay. So short-term memory, it is the encoding method is visual or acoustic, and then for long-term memory is semantic. The capacity for short-term memory, as we know, is limited using Miller's rule of five 7 plus minus 2 items. So it's 5, 7, or 9 items. Okay, and long-term memory is unlimited. Duration is limited for short-term memory, 15 to 30 seconds, and then for long-term memory is unlimited. Okay, so anything that didn't go beyond 30 seconds in our memory and didn't go to long-term memory, that means they'll be gone forever. Okay, from our memory. Okay, unless we get the information again and then we manage to store it in long-term memory. And then retrieval method is you retrieve them by sequence, basically. Sequentially, whatever that you put into your brain, that is short-term memory, right? You will retrieve them the same way you put them in. However, for long-term memory, it's by association. That's how you retrieve them. You have to associate with what you have right now. For instance, the reason why we give you exam questions, right? Like we give you essay questions, for example. The clue is the question itself. You have to find the keywords in it, and then you will try to associate them with the terms, and then you write the essay for us, for instance. That's how you retrieve them, okay? And then this is basically a video. I will share with you the slide later on so that you can have a look at the link. And then it's quite about 5 minutes long, so it's better for you to perhaps watch it on your own. So it's about a guy. Let me just summarize for you. His name is Stephen Wiltshire. He's from the UK. So he's an autistic person. He was diagnosed with autism when he was before he was 10 years old, basically. So he was in school, and then his teachers noticed that he struggled a lot with connecting with others or giving eye contact and then all that. So his mom knew that this child is different already. So that's why they brought him to a school whereby teachers can give him more attention. It's not a special school, basically. But his teacher noticed one thing about him is he's really good in drawing. And then the details that he has basically on the drawing is just amazing, too amazing, basically. He can draw like really, really well since he was young, but the details are amazing in a way whereby he can draw, like he remembers every single number of a different number of windows basically in different buildings in London, for instance. So that's like amazing because even the architect who draw them, perhaps he only remembers them because he's the one who draw them. Okay, so yeah, so you can have a look at this video after this. So he's an autistic savant, they call him, because he has photographic memory. Okay, so just an example of how photographic memory people are. Okay, so yeah, so how is the information stored in our memory? As we talked about it just now, by encoding, storage, or retrieval. So encoding is converting information into a form that can be entered into memory, and then storage is retaining information over a period of time, and then retrieval is locating and accessing specific information when needed at later times. Okay, encode, store, and retrieve. Encoding is when information comes into our memory system from sensory input, okay, echoic, haptic, and all that, okay, the three of them. And it needs to be changed into a form that the system can cope so that it can be stored. There are three main ways, as I've mentioned just now, either through picture, through sound, or through media. Okay, and then storage where the information is stored, how long the memory lasts for duration, how this what is the duration of the memory, and how much can be stored at any time capacity, and what kind of information is held, what information did you keep, what type of information did you remove, basically. Okay, and then retrieval is you do them by recognition, recalling, and relearning. Short-term memory is stored and retrieved sequentially, and retrieve by association for long-term memory, as I mentioned just now. How do we retrieve our long-term memory? Okay, one way, as I said just now, is by recalling. There are different types of recalling as well. There are free recalling, serial recalling, and queue recalling. Remembering the person of the name of the person we know, fill in the blanks question example, and all that. So those are recalling. Okay. So these are the different example of different recalling, okay? So not to confuse you. So it's quite simple, basically. Free recalling is involved simply trying to generate as much relevant information as possible from a memory stored in any order at all. So that is what you do when you want to answer an essay question, basically. So it's just freely recalling whatever you can remember, and that's it, okay? So that's why everyone will be like, kerut their dahi while doing essay questions because they're trying to make their brain remember, okay? And then a person is given a list of items to remember, and then it's tested by being asked to recall them in any order, for example. Like you want to go to the grocery store for your mom, but you have lost the paper that your mom gave you, right? but you remember reading through the list once or twice, and then you try to recall what your mom wants you to buy, for instance. Okay, and serial recalling is the ability to recall items or events in the order in which they occurred. Serial order helps us to remember the order of events of our lives. Lives are basically is our autobiographical memory, or when we were born, when did we graduate, when we got married, when we have our first child and all that. Okay. And cues a recalling or cue recalling is act as a guide to what person is supposed to remember. A cue can be virtually anything that we act as a reminder, like a smell, a song, or a color, or a place. Let's just take an example of it. Recognition is associating events or physical object with anything that we have experienced or encountered before. It involves a process of comparison of information with memory. For instance, recognizing a known face, true or false or multiple choice questions. Recognition usually has a lower threshold than recall. Okay, so relearning refers to the process of learning again what has already been stored in our long-term memory, may have decayed over time. So that's why once we have learned something for the first time, it becomes easier to learn again thereafter, for instance. Okay, but these basically applies basically mostly to your exam. Like you have learned in lecture before, a lecturer has explained to you, or teachers explained to you, and after that, before the exam, you just flip through the notes or some books that you find like more interesting for you, and after that, you're able to remember them. Okay, during the exam, you feel as if the book is next to you, but it's not because you have already memorized them. Serial learning is recalling patterns of facts or stimuli in the order of which they are represented. So most serial learning studies use a procedure called serial anticipation, where one stimulus is presented at the time and the learner uses that word as a cue for the next word. The second word then serves as a cue for the third, and so on, basically. Okay? So to you, like you put them in order whereby you're able to link them together, for example, all the piece of information that you want to remember for exams, right? And then the brain parts that involve formation of memory. So this, I believe you know it more than I do. Okay, frontal lobe, what they do, motor cortex, and all that, amygdala. So amygdala is vital to formation of new emotional memories. For instance, like for instance, because I use this term, I always explain about amygdala in my research a lot because I study mostly about young people with psychopathic traits. So basically, they are psychopath in the making. Okay, so we always try to explain why are the amygdala, is it intact and all that, trying to explain all this information. Okay, and forgetting none other than Dory. That's the picture that I put there. Dory from Finding Nemo and finding Dory as well, the new one. Okay, the newer one. So Dory, as you know, she has a short-term memory. She has problem with short-term memory, and then she will just not be able to remember after you told her something very quickly. Okay, and she just won't remember after that. So forgetting is failure to recall previously stored information, whatever that you think you have been trying to remember but you cannot. Forgetting, there's a short-term and long-term memory, different theories to explain them. So under short-term memory, there's trace decay theory and displacement theory, and for long-term memory are interference theory, and then there are other theories as well to explain memory as a whole in general. For instance, trace decay theory said that they assume that memory leave a trace in the memory. Assume that memory leave a trace in our brain, basically, our brain capacity in terms of memory lah. So you might find it confusing. Why I use the term memory twice? So you can say that the next one is just the brain, basically. Leave a trace in our brain of memory. Okay, a trace is some form of physical or chemical change in our brain, occurs as a result of automatic decay or fading of memory trace. Displacement theory suggests that forgetting is due to lack of availability. Okay, it's because our brain has a limited capacity for short-term memory, so you can only hold a small information at a time. So when the new information is coming in, the older one has to go out, okay, to replace the new one. We replace the old ones. Interference theory occurs because memory interfere with and disrupt one another. Two ways of interference is proactive or retroactive. Proactive is when you cannot learn a new task because an old task that has been learned. For instance, remember when you were in school, we were taught that Pluto is a planet in our solar system. Then being told as an adult, right, when you were in college or whatever it is, and you notice that, oh, Pluto is no longer considered a planet, but they call it a dwarf planet instead. So having such strong memory will negatively impact the recall of the new information. And when asked how many planets are there, we might still say 9 planets instead of just 8, because we still include Pluto in the planets, right? In fact, the previously when I was in school, I learned that there were 9 planets, so I have the mnemonic in my head up to this day. So I just have to remember to eliminate Pluto out of the mnemonic. Retroactive memory, on the other hand, is basically when you forget a previously learned task due to learning a new task. Example, calling your ex-boyfriend or girlfriend by your new boyfriend or girlfriend's name, or learning new way to make a paper airplane, and then not being able to remember the way you used to make them. Whatever that you already used to back then, you don't remember them anymore because you learn a new way of doing it. And then you find a new way is more interesting, so you no longer want to remember the old one. Okay? More on forgetting, reconstructive theory. This is just basically the general theory that I talked about just now, okay? They don't fall into either categories of long-term or short-term memory, so it's just in general. Reconstructive theory memory is never a literal recount of past experiences. Rather, it is dependent on the constructive processes present at the time of encoding, influenced by various cognitive process, perception, imagination, semantic memory, and beliefs, among others. So the reconstructive process of memory recall is subjected to distortion by other intervening cognitive functions such as individual perception, social influences, and world knowledge, all of which can lead to errors during reconstruction. And then Bartlett suggests that in the absence of all information, we fill in the gaps to make more sense of what happened. According to him as well, we do this using schemas. So what does schemas mean? Schema is with the knowledge and experience of the situation, and we use this process to complete our memory. This means that our memories are a combination of specific traces encoded at the time of the event, along with our knowledge, expectation, belief, and experiences of such an event. So reconstructive error under this reconstructive theory is basically confabulation or false memory. Okay, some key sources of information are missing from our memory. So other resources are used to produce a cohesive, internally consistent, and often believable false memory. So this is not, we're not talking about those people who make up something, like you make something up intentionally to replace something that you don't remember. But this one is like you don't do it intentionally. It wasn't your intention, but you just don't remember, but your brain just fill up the blank for you because you just don't do it consciously, basically. So you don't know what they're remembering is false, then they have no intent to deceive, basically. So that's what it means. So people with Korsakoff syndrome, for example, or Alzheimer's disease and traumatic brain injury, who go through all these, they basically might have problem with a confabulation, basically, or maybe they do have it. Okay, so they have false memory, basically. Okay. Motivated forgetting, on the other hand, is thought suppression. So it's a method of blocking the recall of these arousing memories, a conscious form of excluding thoughts and memories from awareness. For example, if something reminds a person of an unpleasant event, their mind will steer towards unrelated to topics, so they don't want to remember that. Okay. Um, Repression or defense mechanism, or unconsciously they're unconscious, like in psychogenic amnesia, a patient, for example. And some people who went through these are the some people who went through trauma, for instance, they don't want to remember what happened. For example, rape victims, so they don't remember at all what happened to them because they suppress them so well, and then they don't want to think about that anymore. Okay. And what are the techniques that you can improve your memory, basically, and recall whatever you remember? So one method is by using mnemonics, as I've mentioned a few times just now. Encoding becomes more organized and it is easier to remember and process information. Reduce the need for you to intentionally resource at the point of the retrieval of the item or at the piece of information. Cognitive strategies, on the other hand, is leverage semantic connections that will allow the brain to process and work more efficiently. Information becomes related to each other and the information sticks, and chunking lead to an increase in the short-term memory capacity. And individual pieces of information are bound together into a meaningful whole. What does chunking means actually, and how do you do that? So let's just talk about mnemonics first and what do they actually mean. These are all the term that you need to basically perhaps remember in your psychiatry posting, okay? And just part of them, basically, not everything. So this is one of them, the causing drugs or this, and then how do we remember them and all these. Okay, so you try to remember. Perhaps it's not 100% relevant to what we use here. And then delirium causing drugs, what are they? All these, I believe you have to remember. Okay, and then the mnemonics is acute change in MS. Okay, and then aspirin, the side effect is all this, and the other ones are all these that you have to use, like pharmacology. Okay, and in terms of depression, what is it? Okay, so they are quite and I have prepared some question as well with model answers. They are very simple questions, so you can answer them as well. I put the answers here. Okay, so that's about today's lecture. As I said, they are very brief, not a lot of things for you to study through as well. Yeah. So do you have anyone has any questions that I can address regarding this lecture today?
Doctor, just some
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
Regarding the memory skill, the procedural memory skill, right? So
Mm-hmm.
is the muscle memory considered the same as memory skill?
Sorry, come again. What memory?
Uh, Muscle memory, because sometimes, like you mentioned, patient with amnesia, they can still remember the skills that they already achieved before this, like for sport and etc. So is the muscle memory or is just the same,
Yeah. Yes,
just
it is the
different
same
different things?
basically. Muscle memory is actually
Ah,
a form of procedural memory as well. So it's just,
oh, okay.
yeah, the same thing. They are the same thing. Okay. Sorry, I should have just mentioned that because, yeah, I know in medical term, they like to use it because procedural memory is what we normally use in psychology. So it's actually the same thing. Muscle memory is actually a form of procedural memory as well because they involve the same thing, motor tasks and all that. Okay. So good that you mentioned it. So next time I remember to put it in because previously student didn't mention that before, so I thought like they know that they are the same anyways. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Thank you. So they are the same.
Thank you, Doctor.
All right, anyone else? I'll just edit them straight away so that I will not forget them next time. Okay, anyone else has any questions? If you don't have any questions, I will send these slides to your through your group leader. Okay, so if you have the time, I will just basically put this YouTube link so that you just take it lah, and then you can watch this amazing autistic savant and how he basically how amazing is his mind. Our mind is actually amazing. It's just basically how do we use our memory and capacity of it and needing to use them at the right time. And sometimes when our memory is just being affected sometimes by trauma, and sometimes during exams, right? It's just a traumatizing event as well because you remember what happened in the past, like you have failed before, or you always feel like you are scared and all that because fear can affect our memory so badly. So that's why there are strategies as well to how to help you to get over your fear and anxiety at that moment of time, which you will learn the strategy when you're in your year 5, closing to when you are going for your pro exam. Okay. So the YouTube link on the video that I want to show you on the what do we call that, photographic memory, the guy with the photographic memory is in the chat box. Okay, so copy it first, otherwise I will also send it to your group leader Alif, so he will share with you guys. I also put the link there as you can see. Okay, so yeah, so that's it for today's lecture. And if you have further questions, feel free to ask me in the next seminar, or perhaps just you can text me and all that. Okay, I'm more than happy to answer any further questions. So yeah, so the next that we are going to meet the next time is basically going to be seminar on personality traits and personality disorders. So I will send the outline for through your group leader as well. Because I'm not sure whether it's still on e-learning or not. I haven't been opening e-learning for a while now. So it's to save you some trouble, I will send to your group leader so that you guys can prepare for those who are presenting on the seminar. Okay, you guys can prepare for the thing as well. All right. Thank you so much for your time, and it's your lunchtime now, so I will let you get to it before you have your next thing at 2:30 later on. Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Bye. Have a nice afternoon.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
you. Bye.
Thank you, Doctor.